I just listened to every album by King Crimson, and here are my thoughts. Going into this, I knew literally nothing about King Crimson, save for that Greg Lake was one of their founding members, which I knew of from my a couple videos ago. I did Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, but I did not know any King Crimson songs, so this was all new to me. So yeah, if you're so inclined, then I invite you to take a break from election day anxiety and go on this journey with me. So King Crimson has had a lot of members. The only consistent member has been Robert Fripp, who was a founding member. Every other member is just switching out from album to album. They've had it looked like a couple dozen members throughout their career. But they start off in 1969 releasing an album called In the Court of the Crimson King. And this album is a landmark in the invention and development of progressive rock. And it's a genre I'm learning more and more about as I go through, ELP and now King Crimson. 2 bands from now, I'm going to do Yes. As far as I could tell, this album earned its spot as legendary status. I thoroughly enjoyed this album, and I don't think I'm just going to love progressive rock for being progressive rock, but there are a lot of things that progressive rock does that I love, and this is a good example of kind of like acid progressive rock. So in the late 60s, there's like a heavy psychedelic rock movement. This incorporates that sound with the classic progressive rock tropes of unusual scales, very jazz influenced, and unusual time signatures. 21st Century Schizoid Man and In the Court of the Crimson King were the best songs on here. I did also enjoy I Talk to the Wind and Epitaph. Those were both very nice songs. The next album, In the Wake of Poseidon, largely carries over this kind of heavy psychedelic rock sound. I found the quality of the songwriting to be a little bit less than, but this was still a very strong album with several good songs. Specifically, the kind of 1-2-3 punch that happens towards the beginning of the album where you get pictures of a city, cascade and cadence, and then the title track. That's where the main strength of this album lies. Everything around that could kind of go on and off with losing my attention a little bit. Now the band starts going into crisis mode and members start switching out, and they release 2 albums right after this in 70 and 71. These albums are a pretty drastic departure from the first 2 in that they lean so much more into their jazz influences here. So Lizard, released in 1970, really pioneers this very kind of clashing, abrupt, discordant jazz kind of sound. I thought this album was still a little less than the first 2 that had come out. It's a sound that I don't care for as much as I love heavy psychedelic rock. This album's strength is in its first and last song, Circus, and then the title track, Lizard. Both of these were quite enjoyable songs. Then Islands comes out in 71, so that's the second very jazz album. And I liked this one a little bit more than Lizard. I don't know how popular of an opinion that is, but Islands, some criticize this album as meandering a bit, which is understandable, but it's also a pretty relaxing album with a lot of really nice melodies. Best songs on here being the first track, Formentera Lady, Sailor's Tale, and then the last track, the title track. This album does feature a song that I actually dislike though, and that is Ladies of the Road. I found it to be so over the top with its subject matter and innuendos. It's like they're trying to be sleaze rock but be progressive rock at the same time, and I have a tough time reconciling those 2 things. They don't really go together. After this, the band takes a short break, and they come back and release 3 albums in 1973 and 1974. And this is the other shining spot of their career. These 3 albums are so strong. Their overall sound is different once again. You have a very experimental sound now, and the production is a good bit cleaner than their first 2 albums. So rather than being more heavy psychedelic, there's a very kind of clean, undistorted production here. The first of these 3, Lark's Tongue and Aspic, which I thought was just gibberish words until my wife shared with me that it refers to a medieval recipe. I loved this album. This is my second favorite King Crimson album. The whole album's great. You should listen to the whole thing. I love the title track. The song Exiles on here is in my top 5 favorite King Crimson songs. I just love how in this group of 3 albums they incorporate some more Eastern associated instrumentation. So we see some like Eastern European instrumentation, some songs and melodies that reminded me of a little more Chinese influence. In any case, they release Starless and Bible Black next, and this is also just an excellent album. I loved The Great Deceiver, I loved Lament, I loved The Night Watch. If you like kind of softer, medieval sounding love songs, then The Night Watch is a song you should definitely check out. And then right after this, they release Red, the final album in this little trilogy of albums that they're releasing. And Red is another great, great album. If you want to get a feel for this album or this era without committing too deeply into it, then one more Red Nightmare on this album is a good song to check out. But the album as a whole, I mean, the title track was really good. Starless was really good. So they go on another short break and they release another trilogy of albums between 81 and 84. And these albums are still very experimental. They have a lot of 80s production. So like the 80s bass, the 80s guitar tone is very much here. There's also a style here that I had a tough time putting my finger on what it was called, but it was very distinct. I looked it up, and I think the word I was looking for was minimalist. And you might not think that's the right word because this is still progressive rock. There's still a lot of notes in weird time signatures, but there's something about the overall feeling of it that made me feel like I was in this like 80s art gallery with white walls and an art curator that had like, you know, square shoulder pads. I don't know how else to put it. That's just like the kind of feeling that these albums had. The first of these albums, Discipline, is the best. Even though it starts off with a song called Elephant Talk, which is another song that I actively disliked, it was just too strange for me. But Frame by Frame here, it's maybe another top 5 King Crimson song. The song's amazing. The rest of the album's really good too. There's like Mate Kudasai, I might be butchering that pronunciation, but that was a cool song. Thela Hunjinji was a cool song. The title track was really cool. Indiscipline did some of the kind of talking experimentalism that Elephant Talk did, but I liked it a bit more in Discipline. Then they released Beat, which I had a really tough time getting into. I don't really have any favorites from this album. It really came and went, kind of as if they wanted to get people who loved 80s pop into progressive rock, and that would already be a very difficult thing to do, but if it's even possible, they didn't really achieve that here. Then they released 3 of a Perfect Pair, which I thought was a step up from Beat, but not as good as Discipline. It had some cool songs in here, like Model Man and Sleepless. Dig Me was also a pretty cool song. But that closes off this grouping of albums, and they released one more group of 3 albums, but it's spaced out a little bit more. So between 95 and 2003, they released Thrack, The Construction of Light, and The Power to Believe. And these albums were okay. But they also represent what I dislike about progressive rock when it's not very good. So at its best, progressive rock gives very creative, educated musicians more room to express very big ideas or very big feelings that they have. But at its worst, it seems like these people are making music in odd time signatures with odd scales just for the sake of making music like that, and you can't even rely on really catchy beats or melodies to pick it back up at all. So Thrack was my favorite of these 3 albums. Vroom was a kind of cool song. Dinosaur was all right. Walking on Air was all right. One Time was also on this album. I thought that was a pretty cool song. The instrumental mood setters set in between were also, you know, all right. The next 2 were a little more challenging. I liked Into the Frying Pan from Construction of Light. And then in their final album, The Power to Believe, I thought Eyes Wide Open was all right. Facts of Life and Happy With What You Have to Be Happy With are 2 other songs on here that were pretty good. But admittedly, these last few albums, a lot of it sounded like mathematical noise for the sake of it and not for any purpose. There is my album ranking. The first one is mandatory listening for any classic rock fan. 2 through 5 are great quality albums if you're into progressive rock. If you're not, then you may find them a little difficult. 6 through 9 are solid albums if you're a King Crimson fan. And then 10 through 13 are albums that I think you'll only like if you love progressive rock for the sake of being progressive rock. My time's up. Thank you for listening. I'm doing Van Halen next. Have a great rest of your day.